Hi and welcome to my channel. I'm Susanna and this is a reading vlog and June reading wrap-up. I'll be talking about the books I read in June, plus there's a bonus visit to a bookstore and a small book haul, so stay tuned for that. I spent the final week and a half of June at my mother's place, about a 5-hour train ride from where I live. I didn't pack a book with me because I planned to choose my reading from my mother's bookshelf, but I did read something during the train ride. I was reading a Finnish popular science magazine, Tiede, and appropriately this issue included a news article that talked about the benefits of reading fiction. Apparently, reading fiction teaches you empathy and problem-solving skills, so clearly we're doing something right. Anyway, back to the books. These were my options for the week. As you can see, it's not a mystery where my love of reading comes from. I've always been surrounded by books, and some of these I've read already as a teenager, but a lot remain unread. I narrowed it down to these two books, Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls and John Steinbeck's East of Eden. I decided to ask Instagram for help, so I put a poll in my stories and Hemingway won the vote. The first days of my summer vacation weren't very warm, but they were sunny enough, so I decided to read outside with my reading buddy. This lovely little girl is Ella, but she was more interested in lying in the shade and doing some light gardening work. She seems to think my mother needs more holes in the ground to plant more fruit trees in addition to the pear and apple and cherry trees she already has. Back to the Hemingway. For Whom the Bell Tolls is set in Spain during the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. Robert Jordan, an American volunteer in the war, is sent to blow up a bridge with the help of a local Republican guerrilla unit. He meets and falls in love with Maria, a woman captured and sexually abused by the Phalangists, which was a nationalist group. The book includes graphic descriptions of the brutalities of both sides in the war. Hemingway's style is famously sparse and it could be called journalistic. It's not my favorite writing style, but I do read Hemingway once in a while. The depiction of the war was interesting, but because of Hemingway's sparse style, I didn't connect with any of the characters. I'm also not a huge fan of how Hemingway writes his female characters. Maria reminded me of Catherine Barkley, the main character in Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. They are described in the same way, and both Maria and Catherine speak exactly the same way. And also Robert's and Maria's relationship escalates very quickly. They only know each other for 3 days and are supposedly madly in love with each other. This insta-love did not feel like the earth-shattering love affair it was probably supposed to be. Still, for its depiction of the war, the book absolutely deserves its status as a modern classic, and I would recommend it if you like Hemingway or are interested in finding out what his books are like. I only read around 100 pages or so a day, so it took me 5 days to finish For Whom the Bell Tolls. And then it was time to go shopping. My mother lives in a town in eastern Finland called Joensuu, and there are some pretty wolf statues near the marketplace in the middle of the town. We sat next to one while enjoying a bit of ice cream. Now, the highlight of the day was obviously the bookstore. The store is part of the chain of Suomalainen Kirjakauppa, which means Finnish bookstore, but they have a pretty nice selection of English books as well. There were some gorgeous Jane Austen books in Finnish, but unfortunately I could not justify getting any. So instead I picked up some Finnish paperbacks and spent the rest of my time browsing the English paperbacks from the fiction and fantasy shelves. Now here's what I got. There was a deal of 3 paperbacks for 15 euros, so I got 3 paperbacks in Finnish. The first is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. I've only read The Hound of Baskerville before, so it will be exciting to read more. The second book was The Court Dancer by Kyung-Suk Shin. The book is a historical fiction set in Korea in the late 19th century and tells about a dancer in the Korean court. The third book I don't think has been translated into English, at least not yet. It's Hajustajatekijän tytär by Kaisa Åkerman. It's also historical fiction set in the ancient Assyria and it tells about the daughter of a woman who makes perfumes and ointments. The author is an Assyriologist, so I expect the historical details will be correct. And then I got 3 paperbacks in English. I picked up Stephanie Carber's Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After. The covers are gorgeous and I've heard a lot of good things about these books. Unfortunately, I only later realized that I should probably read Caravel's series first, so these might have to wait for a while before I read them. The last book I got is Axie O's The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. Again, a gorgeous cover, but I know nothing else about this book. After Hemingway, it was time to choose another book. I picked this gorgeous vintage leather-bound book with marbled covers and a marbled top edge. This is Emile Zola's The Lady's Paradise. I once again headed outdoors to read, but as the weather was getting hotter, I found it better to read in the shade. My reading buddy agreed. The Lady's Paradise is set in Paris in the 1860s and tells the story of a rise of a department store, the development of modern commerce, and the downfall of specialty stores. The depiction of the eponymous department store is hugely visual, with paragraphs upon paragraphs describing the displays of silks, laces, parasols, and other goods. Reading it made me want to go visit the store, or at least I would love to see a movie adaptation of the book. Unfortunately, the characters are not nearly as interesting as the setting. There is a whole host of shopkeepers, salespeople, and customers, but we only get glimpses of them as the story moves from one character to another and doesn't stop to paint a full picture of any of them. Not even the main characters, Denis Baudu, a young salesperson, and Octave Muret, the owner of the department store. That also means that Denis's and Muret's love story becomes a rather irrelevant part of the plot, and I could never root for them to get past their hesitancies. What I did enjoy, however, was the depiction of the development of modern capitalism and how fast fashion pitting workers against each other and IKEA layout strategy are not so recent innovations after all, but have their roots in the 19th century department stores. If you're looking for a character-driven story, this book will most likely disappoint you, but if you're interested in reading about 19th century Parisian history and society, this is a fascinating read. The Lady's Paradise was about the same length as For Whom the Bell Tolls. I found it faster to read though, and I could have finished it in 4 days if the heat hadn't gotten so bad that I got a migraine. So I spent 2 days resting my head and reading a lot less. But I did finish the book right before it was time to head back home. So those were the 2 novels I read in June, but they were not the only books I read. I read Jerry Halliwell's memoir, If Only. I was never a huge Spice Girls fan, but growing up in the 90s it was impossible to miss the hype. This reread was partly nostalgia and partly research for a potential novel idea I have. It was interesting to read about Jerry's struggles, the music industry, and the absolute chaos her 2 years in the band were. I read a rather old non-fiction book about ancient Greek and Latin literature and their impact on later Western literature. I also read the final 2 books of my Ancient Texts project. Aesop's fables are fun and very short stories, mostly about animals, but sometimes about people, with a moral lesson tacked in the end. I read a selection of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which are mythological stories often about people turning into plants or animals, but there are also other famous myths. It's a great starting point if you want to go straight to the sources of ancient myths. And finally, I read 4 atlases. 2 of these were my mother's old school books, a historical atlas and her school atlas. The last 2 were modern atlases. They obviously are mostly maps, but both also had interesting articles about Earth, space, and geographical features. Let me know in the comments what was your favorite book in June, and I'll see you again in my next video.